Hello everyone and welcome to the Authoritas Teatime SEO. I'm SEO Joe Blogs and I'm also joined here by Carrie Shepherd from Authoritas. Thank you everyone for coming on the show today. This is a tea break where we encourage everyone to take a 15-minute break, connect with each other and learn something new. So this is our third month we're running this. We have this on Mondays and Thursdays. And today we are joined by three speakers who will be talking about pagination and query strings. What should you do? That's Adam, Orit, and Kiera. And we saw Orit as well on Thursday at our Managing the SEO Process in-house. So we're at Authoritas. We put on Teatime SEO, but we're also an SEO software platform. We've actually just released a new feature called Visibility Explorer. This allows you to view competitors, identify where you're appearing in the SERPs of your website and of competitors, and also the most important URLs. You can also download up to 500,000 keywords for free. So give it a try. Go to authoritas.com and you can try any website you like for free. Just give us a call if you have any questions and want to know further. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our speakers who are going to start introducing themselves. Thank you very much. Over to you, Adam.
Thank you. So my name is Adam Gent. I'm a product manager at Decrawl. I've been in SEO for about 10 years. I run some technical tests. I used to be an ex-host of Tech SEO podcast. I'm currently a product manager at Decrawl.
Hey, my name is Orit, Orit, however you'd like to call me. I answer to both. I'm originally from Argentina, gone to Israel and to the UK now, in SEO since 2008. Brighton SEO speaker about this very topic we're going to speak about now, and co-author of the Mastering In-House SEO book by Blue Array. I set up in-house SEO from scratch my last two roles. I specialize in e-commerce technical SEO, international SEO, and blog content strategy. I've joined my current role a year and a half ago. And yeah, I'm living in London with my husband, 2 kids, and cat.
Hello, I am Kiera Lavington. I run a marketing team for a full-service digital agency in Norwich, originally from Ipswich, so not very far. So manage a growing team of 3 digital marketers at the moment. I've got about 8 to 9 years in the SEO world, specialising in tech SEO, but love anything to do with data, tracking, particularly tag manager, problem solving, analysis. I love rugby, music, and travel.
Thank you very much. So thank you to our speakers for joining us today. I know they're all very, very busy. And I also want to say thank you to all our attendees, our audience, those that are logged in and those that are not. So Lawrence, Charlotte, Shagantan, thank you all. Please drop your questions and any comments you have in the chat, and we'll be answering them at the end of our tea time. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to speakers who are going to now share their insightful tips about paginations and query strings.
Cool. So to start off, I'm going to tell like a slight bit of a story. So around my tips. So I did the Brighton SEO talk last year, just around pagination on the web. I took 150 websites from the Alexa top 500, looked at different types of sites, and I just wanted to look at what was meant to be a very quick and easy Brighton SEO talk around this particular subject that isn't really talked about. And I based all of these criteria of SEO friendly, like pagination, on the criteria that Google gave in their technical guidelines. You just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Then John Mueller announced just at the end of my study that they no longer supported Relics or Previous. They haven't used it for years. And this kind of presented a slight problem for me because I'd based quite a lot of my talk on this very subject. So I took that kind of change, and I thought it was an opportunity to really look at pagination in terms of completely rethinking it, simply because of what after this announcement, or how Google kind of talked about it. So I kind of came up with a presentation and documentation and guides around pagination that basically rethought pagination. It's something that I learned just from thinking about it in a completely different way. I only have like 5 minutes to talk, so I can't tell you everything, but I found that quite a lot of pagination based on this new criteria didn't meet, in the wild, my observations, didn't meet the guidance. Like over 50% of most pagination wasn't crawlable or indexable. Sometimes didn't even use basic URLs. I found that there are different types of pagination design, so infinite scroll and lazy loads, which are different kinds of components. Those were even more these are less SEO friendly in my study when I was finding this. I found like tons of different stats. I've given a link in the presentation if you want to go to view crawl to find the information. I give a lot more detail of exactly what I did and what I found. Basically, to summarize it, I found that in the wild people don't really do pagination that well. Next slide, please. So the biggest thing actually I want to pull from my guides and my study was this concept that pagination, when I began to look at it really think about it and talk to John Mueller and talk to other SEOs, I really began to think actually pagination is access points. They're really important for deep level pages to get internal links. Now what was really interesting is that quite a lot of people didn't understand without RelNext or previous how to handle pagination. And it's really interesting now that Google are like, yeah, we haven't used it for years. We don't use it in our crawling or indexing signals. So we kind of take that away, what we need to do, what we need to think about, and that's internal linking. Next slide, please. So the reason why you need to think about it, and this is why probably my top tip around pagination, is you need to think about the canonical URL. You need to think about indexed paginated pages. That's because of how Google treats pagination. How Google treats excluded pages from the index. So basically treats them like a no index, no follow. If you drop a page from Google's index through a no index or canonical tag, or any other form that doesn't select the URL as a canonical URL, basically Google doesn't take into account the internal linking signals after a while. Now, obviously, this is a huge problem if you're kind of de-indexing your paginated pages to try and get rid of any index bloat accidentally, because what you're effectively doing is removing the internal links to deeper level pages, which is creating huge amounts of orphan pages. And this is something I kind of was like, whoa, that's actually quite a huge thing. And it's something that I didn't think about until I completely had my talk completely changed 3 weeks before the talk. But it's something that I'd really think about. So I guess my top tips, summarize my quick talk, is think about the pagination dependencies of your website. Think about just how important your internal link structure is on your website. Think about using web crawlers to remove, exclude paginated pages from your crawling, your web crawls, using Screaming Frog, Deep Crawl, OnCrawl, whatever you want to use, and see exactly how many pages are dependent on pagination. Because when I did look at that, I actually found in extreme cases that almost 2/3 of websites were dependent on pagination, and yet they didn't follow best practice guidelines. And without really thinking about internal linking and indexing problems, this could be a huge issue for most sites. So my biggest tip would be to really think about your pagination dependencies and your internal linking, as well as the usual canonicalization, crawling, indexing parts as well. And there's a link to my guide I wrote on how to actually optimize pagination post RelNext and rel previous. That's it. I think. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, hey, so today I'm going to talk about my background as far as my e-commerce journey with pagination, and I'm going to give you a little, this background is relevant because that's how I got into it in the first place. So essentially I joined SilkFred in November 2018. The dates are relevant because You'll see why. As the first ever SEO in a business that was online only and was 6 years old, so you can imagine 6 years old, 6 years without an SEO, not in-house, now not outsourced, no SEO. So I had my work cut out for me, basically. Pagination was something that was on my mind, but I definitely had much bigger fires to put out. I didn't realize how important it was. So essentially 5 months after I started peak in-house firefighting mode on the 21st of March, John Mueller confirms that rel next previous is not used by Google at all. This little meme gif there is my response. So I was panicking and I was confused because it was in the back of my mind. And now it's even, I less know what to do about it. So then came Adam to the rescue, which was quite surprising because he was already working on his study and then he had to change everything. And for me, it was like John had his statement and then I got the guide from Adam, so it was pretty convenient for me. So actually, I learned a lot from his study in his Brighton presentation, of course. So I very much recommend his search engine friendly pagination guidelines, and which resulted from his state of the web search-friendly pagination and infinite scroll. So next slide, please, Joe. This was me in Brighton SEO during Adam's presentation. So yes, now I know what I have to do. And the typing cat was actually me live slacking to the devs. Yes, that was during his talk. And then I continued with that after I came back from Brighton. Yeah, next slide, please. So my starting point versus where we are a year after. So this is what we did to actually make our pagination friendly to Google. So we're pretty much in one of the worst situations as far as search-friendly pagination that there was. So a year ago, our canonicalization was pointing to main, so all the paginated pages were pointing to page 1. Our URL structure was using hashtags and parameters as in something that Google cannot see, so it was completely blocked from Google. And our pagination was also rendered via client-side JavaScript. Also a very difficult thing for Google to process, even though it is getting better with it. Crawlability, obviously, no. Indexability, no. Crawl depth, yeah, very, very deep. So a year after, completely different picture, canonicalizing to self. We are one of the few, and I'll tell you why I'm saying few, because I looked at this in more detail comparing to my competitors. One of very few fashion sites that use permanent URLs. Most of them use parameters. I'll talk about that. We've moved from client-side rendering to server-side rendering of JavaScript. So Google has a static HTML version that it's getting as far as interlinks is concerned, as far as pagination is concerned, as far as everything. So everything is much more accessible to Google. It is crawlable, it is indexable, and we've decreased our crawl depth significantly. But having said that, I have a little asterisk in there. That's two extremes, actually. So we went from a very, very deep site to a quite flat site, which is actually something to be very wary of. We do want to give a hierarchy of importance to Google, which is something that John, when he reviewed my presentation, told me to be careful about. So this is still work in progress, not saying we're perfect, but in any case, I know it's not ideal because Google is not clear about which are the most important pages of my site 100%, but it does do a pretty good job, and performance show that this is actually good. So it's not done yet, but it's much, much, much better. So as far as, sorry, if you can come back. Sorry about that. So as far as crawlability and indexability of the website. So before, this is like the main picture on the right side, 69% of my website was not accessible to Google, which is numbers very similar that Adam saw in his research. And now 99% of the site is accessible to Google. So quite a change, quite exciting. Next slide. So result, this is actually good. So this is the pagination that we had. Sorry, it says after, but the top one is supposed to be before. Sorry about that. So yeah, we had a very deep structure that you can see. So for example, only from page, so all the pages between 6 and 10 were not perceived in the first show of the page, so lots of depth there. And this is just a very small example. We have pages with hundreds of paginated pages in there. So this is just an example. After essentially all of the paginated pages are accessible from page 1, so the user can easily go from page 2 to page 253 in a very simple way, and everything is pretty much connected. So as far as results, it was very positive for us. So the 20th of May is the day that we've released search engine friendly pagination, even though it was still rendered on the client side. So I was panicking about that, because I was sure that server side and pagination was going to go live on the same day. It was not. Actually, server side went live a month later. So as soon as I discovered that pagination was still rendered on the client side, so I asked Martin Split about, so how soon are my new paginated pages are going to get rendered? And he said that could take some time, but surprisingly, that was really, really quick, actually. Within days, everything, even client side, was rendered properly on the search results. So this was also a lesson for me to learn that this actually happens much faster. But still, if you can help Google with rendering server side, a very static HTML version of a site, the better. But this is what I had. So, but it still helped, as you can see. Next slide. Okay, so what now? I was curious. A year has gone by. I wonder if my competitors did see this as an opportunity. So this is why this is what my Brighton talk is based on. So I was looking at the state of retail pagination 1 year later, which is very similar to Adam's methodology. So what I did was to crawl and review the top 150 women's fashion retailers in the UK, JavaScript enabled versus disabled. I categorized them by type of pagination, and I used the search engine friendly pagination benchmark of URL uniqueness, crawlability, and indexability. So yeah, I will share some top level stats, only because we don't have time to share all of the information that I found. So I'll see you in October on my Brighton SEO talk. In the meantime, Adam and John reviewed it, and they were liking it. So I'm excited, and I hope that you'll come. So next slide, please. A little bit of top level stats here, so which connect to my tips as well. So overall, as far as I see, I put a few polls together. That's my beginning. Just to ask how aware are people of what happened as far as RelNext previous deprecation, and what are the best practices. So actually, most people are aware that you have to canonicalize to self the pagination, but also sort of most people don't think it's worth it to make all that effort. So that was quite disappointing. So that led me to go deeper in my research to find the data, and I found the following. So overall, 70% of fashion e-commerce sites actively avoid indexing their pagination, which is also something very similar to what Adam found in an overall perspective across a few niches. Most websites in my industry as well avoid in different ways to index their pagination, whether by robots, canonicalize to main, no index, whatever you choose. 32% of the fashion e-commerce pagination is not crawlable, so generating via JavaScript, hashtags, robots, things like that, essentially, to keep Google from calling those away. I also looked at search engine friendliness by pagination type. So I looked at, obviously, all the practices Adam mentioned, like lazy load and pagination, infinite scroll. All in one means that when you have all of your products in one page and you don't have any pagination, which I have a little comment about that. So worst is infinite scroll, also seen by Adam's research. Only 13% of the website who use infinite scroll, their pagination is actually friendly. The best is actually all-in-one. So of course, that's to be expected. If you put all of your products in one page, they would be indexable. The reason why it's only 57% is because these pages have other problems like canonicalizing to a different page altogether, or generating it via JavaScript. That's not at all when it's deactivated. You can't even see the inner links, for example. So they have other problems, but that's definitely the leading way to index your pagination, which is essentially not to have it. But not all websites can do that, because retailers that have tens of thousands of products, it's very difficult to have all in one page. As far as speed is concerned, another performance metric, you could reach that, but it's probably a difficult one. As far as parameters, 94% of the websites use parameters for pagination, which is fine if you know how to make them properly indexable. In my case, only 21% of those were indexable. So be careful when you have parameters. You have to make sure that those that you want to be indexable are, and those that you don't are not. And you probably, effectively block everything that's hindering proper indexability. So as I mentioned, this is still work in progress for us. This is not ideal. Still work on making sure our site structure is the way that we wanted, but pretty good so far. Next slide. Okay, so as far as my top tips, going with a permanent URL is optimal, but it's not always possible. So it's 0.6 actually, sorry about that. 0.6 of the site that I've checked are going with a permanent URL. The rest are going with parameters. So as I mentioned, just clearly distinguish between pagination params and all the rest and block them accordingly. If you can do one thing, so canonical pagination to self now, that would help you. That would help all of your products index much, much better, and that will help the overall visibility of your site. So enable the indexing of your products. Don't be afraid. Pagination is not going to get indexed in itself unless something is wrong. So this is just something that I definitely recommend. I haven't seen many of my pages ranking. I mean, the paginated pages ranking, and the products, the effect that the products get, the boost that the products get is much better. Or at least if you can do, again, one thing, make it crawlable. Ask yourself, is it accessible without JavaScript? So next slide. This is just something that I brought from the SEJ Summit last week, from the guys from Onely. They have a tool called TGIF. There's a link there to see how long will it take for JavaScript-powered content to be indexed by Google. So even though you think, yeah, I can still use JavaScript, it's fine. I can give my links to my product and to my pagination via JavaScript client side. It's fine, but think about it. If they found that after 14 days, only 40% of the JavaScript content, 40% of the JavaScript content is not indexed. If you're talking about a retail site that has ever-changing stock levels and ever-changing products, why risk that? Because you have to give Google your products in the clearest way possible. Because in this way, by the time it gets to your product, there's pretty much a 40% chance of Google not discovering your product and having it gone. So think about that. And yeah, that's it, I think.
Hello, thanks very much, Adam and Orit, for those. So I've decided to focus on some more top-line UX type tips for you, because I knew that Adam and Orit were covering a lot of the technical side, so I didn't want to just repeat what they've said on that. But my first tip does lead on nicely from something Orit was talking about, which was the view all type pages, which I think probably are most applicable to e-commerce sites. And as you were saying, Orit, I guess people would have probably seen this most commonly used on fashion sites. So perhaps boohoo.com, Pretty Little Things, ASOS perhaps, where you're able to view all of the products within a category on one page. You might also be able to view them in a paginated series with the view all as an option. So view all is possibly one of the most preferred methods if you can use it, and we'll go into where you might not want to use view all. Yep, so next slide, please. So this is actually something from Google Webmaster tools, and it is dated back to 2011, but it's still relevant today. So Google does aim to detect a view all version of your content and associate the component pages, so the paginated pages, within that series, if possible. But you can make this more clear to Google by canonicalizing those paginated pages to a view all. This does not mean to canonicalize paginated pages to the first series in the pagination, because that will create problems, as both Adam and Orit talked about, whereby Google will not then necessarily index or see the other paginated pages which link out to other products. Those products would then therefore not effectively have any internal links to them. So this is canonicalizing to a view all, if a view all is possible. So the benefits of view all, possibly the combined latency of loading a set of paginated pages could actually be larger than just loading a view all page, depending on how many products you've got within that category. But we could talk a bit later about how you could improve that. Yeah, next slide. So it can be beneficial, but it's 100% worth testing, because it is not preferable if, for example, the view all page is undesirable as a search result, because perhaps on first load it takes too long. If it does cause loading issues, or the load time or latency is too high, you don't want to use it. If it's too difficult to navigate, so some websites just can't implement it because of the design or setup of the site. We obviously don't want to create problems where people cannot navigate the view all page. Sometimes users prefer a multi-page experience. So they might, for example, want to link to a specific page in the pagination, in which case you wouldn't want to necessarily just have everything on one page. Next slide. So the most important thing, if you want to try a view all, it's very important to test. If you have a large number of product pages within a category, you could increase the code, the HTML, the browser needs to render the page, the number of images to load, the size of the database call. There are things to help with this, such as lazy loading, page caching, using JavaScript to dynamically load in elements. So this can bypass the latency issues caused when creating a view all page. But if those elements are implemented correctly, you can succeed with a view all page. I won't go into exactly what you need to do with lazy loading, etc., but there are things you can put in place to make sure that works. And my second tip is actually around how you could look at your site and start to reduce the pagination on there. So this applies to e-commerce sites. It could apply to where you have articles or a blog section or a resource section where you've got lots of things listed, lots of resources listed, and lots of paginated pages. So before you do anything with pagination, I would recommend having a look at all of your content that sits within series of pagination and ask yourself if you could reduce that. So for example, if you have a blog or resource center on your site and you go there and it's on /blog and everything sits within that page, and then you have the pagination at the bottom and you have blog /page equals to. And that series goes on and on and on. How many pages are actually in that pagination? If there are lots, there's something to be done with actually, could you create more categories to reduce that pagination? And the importance of this is because, again, I won't go into this too much, but the click depth matters in SEO. So effectively, the further away your page is from the root, so the home page, so the more clicks you have to take, or the user has to take to get to the content, the less SEO value that page will have. So if, for example, you had, like I said before, a blog with everything listed in one and in a series of pagination, imagine getting to page 50. How many clicks from the home page are those pages listed on page 50 from the home page? We're talking, you know, lots of clicks to get there. So what we want to do is try and reduce that down. So if you had a blog, you could create 5 categories whereby each then had 10 articles within them, and actually to get to those pages would require a lot less navigation, a lot less clicks to get there. So my tip would be, firstly, to have a look at that. If it's an e-commerce site, could you further categorize your products? Could you look at subcategorizing them? Have a look at your keyword research. Are people looking for products within more categories than actually what you've got on your site? Same with a blog. If you had, for example, an SEO blog, are people looking for, is everything under blog, when in fact you've got 10 articles that are focused on link building? Could you create a link building category and then have those articles listed within there, rather than relying on everyone reaching those from one long list where they have to go through pagination to get to those articles? My next slide it just highlights that for you in a diagram, which shows potentially how many clicks you might have to go through if everything was uncategorized or just within pagination. It's a long way from the home page, if you will. So the importance of these pages, Google isn't going to see these pages as important as if they were linked to better. So the first thing I'd recommend doing, because it might be difficult to know how far away your pages are, I would use a crawling tool such as Screaming Frog, Deep Crawl, OnCrawl, and most of these tools will have a function in them which shows you the click depth, or the depth of your URLs. So here, for example, we can just see the numbers at the bottom there represent effectively how many clicks you would have to take to get to those pages. So on this example, most sit within 3 clicks away, which you should really aim to get all pages available within 3 clicks. There's a series here that are within 4 clicks away, and I've seen sites where you know, the bars raise when you get to 8 or 9 or 10. Those pages are not receiving lots of SEO value. I won't talk about PageRank today, but that is kind of what we're talking about here. So what we want to do is reduce that down and see if we can get most URLs within that top 3. So any of those tools should help you to do that. And then what you can do is, usually you can click on those bars and just see which URLs are sitting outside of being within a reasonable click away from the root of the site. So assess your current pagination, assess your click depth. Can you create more categories, either product-wise or blog or resource-wise? Of course, you're not going to be able to necessarily avoid pagination altogether most of the time. You're going to have some of that. That's fine. It's just about bringing that structure up rather than having this sort of linear pagination. It's trying to get a more reasonable structure. And the other thing you can do is, where you do have pagination, or even if you are using a view all solution, is prioritize your content, or prioritize which pages you're linking to by ordering them, potentially by how much organic traffic they drive, or how much those pages contribute to revenue or sales. So for example, if you had a series of pages, let's say products, that sit within pagination, because you have to have that, think about which are the most important pages and try and get those on the first series of the pagination. So the first kind of load in your categories. And just some do's and don'ts. Like I just said, prioritize the most important products or articles to boost the link equity to these pages. Don't add unique content to every paginated page in the series, because effectively you don't want that to try and outrank the primary category page. Use query strings, but do not use fragmented URLs. Fragmented URLs are where you use, for example, the hash symbol. Google doesn't see anything after the hash, so don't use those. I think a lot of sites still, I've seen, use those from my experience. Do internally link to paginated pages. Do not use nofollow or no index on paginated pages, which I think both Adam and Orit covered as well. It's really important that you don't try to control them with those directives. You can use a canonical to point to a view all page. Don't use canonicals to point to the first page in a paginated series. And also look out for where some content management systems, they will create a page one. So you will land on a category, let's say / shoes. That is the first page in the series. And the CMS might create shoes / one, which is effectively the same page. That can create all sorts of issues. I've come across it loads of times. The next page is 2, not 1, which is a repeat of the first. So that's just something to look out for. So my tips, were more about just having a think about how you can actually improve the internal linking structure of your site before you even need to start looking at pagination, because there might be things you can improve to boost the link equity and make sure all of your products or articles or whatever the pages are within the paginated series, to make sure they're getting good link equity and not just relying on those living within the pagination. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. We had loads of tips from everyone, from our speakers, Adam, Orit, and Kiera. I think we just have time for one question. I'll pass over to Carrie.
Great, thank you. So our one question is for Adam. In your study, you found that overall 65% of website schools did not follow technical guidelines on pagination. Why is this the case, and why are so many sites not following technical guidelines?
I'll kind of answer the first part. So why was because it was mainly around canonicalization indexation problems. Quite a lot of people used like unique URLs to map pagination in that study. They didn't get crawlable links right, and they didn't get indexable page pagination right. So a lot of people canonicalized, no index, blocked by robots.txt, and these seemed to be assumed a lot was around e-commerce and JavaScript sites. They seem to, for some bizarre reason, they had dynamic URLs, but then they used, as Kiera mentioned, hashes. Then they used even when they had a crawlable anchor link, they didn't link. They didn't use a proper URL or relative URL. They used like JavaScript loading event, so it just had this bit of code. That's the main problems I saw. And what was the second part? Well, I didn't.
That's fine. The second half is why are so many sites not following technical guidelines?
I believe it was because of the rel next rel previous. So one of the things I noticed, which was really interesting, was infinite scroll. I think it makes the point quite clearly. So infinite scroll, people who use infinite scroll only ever use rel next and rel previous to almost link the pagination together, but they never really use crawlable links. But Google doesn't crawl URLs in rel XML previous tags. I did a really quick test, and they don't find them all. They don't use them all, and they don't. So I think people relied heavily a lot on rel XML previous and never really thought about it, just slapped it on. As part of my talk, I did. I think I came to the conclusion people just relied heavily on that tag, never really thought about internal link structures, as Kiera rightly mentioned. I think quite a lot of the problems you face with pagination is actually thinking about website architecture and internal linking. I think Orit kind of shows that she's like now well structured her site, improve that, and she's seeing results from that. And I think people, and I never did this, never took that into account when I ever thought about pagination, but now I'm thinking more about internal linking and website architecture when I approach pagination.
That's really useful, thank you. That's all the questions we have time for today. But so anyone who has any more questions, then you can follow up with each of our speakers on Twitter and LinkedIn. Back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, there's loads of tips. I'm sorry we didn't have time to answer all the questions, but yes, please follow Adam on @double_agent on Twitter, Orit on Orit Simu, and Kiera on LinkedIn. Thank you very much to all our speakers. So many useful insights for today. And yes, some of our speakers will also be talking at Brighton SEO. So please look out for them there. And obviously on Thursday, we have our Teatime SEO at 4 p.m. With Marco and James. It's all about best e-commerce CMSs. So which content management systems should you use? Shopify, Magento, or perhaps there are some other ones that you've been using. So this is the opportunity to come and learn a bit more from Marco and James on this best e-commerce CMS topic. And if you've been enjoying Teatime SEO, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like our video, and like this video that you've just been watching. There's loads of tips. So we've got about 5 so far. We'd love to have more. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you again to our speakers, Adam, Kiera, and Orit. Thank you all for joining on today's Teatime SEO.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.